Cool. All right. Okay, my name is Zach McCone. I'm with Mr. Johnston. Mr. Johnston, what classes do you teach at Golden Valley?
I'm teaching career technical education and world history and Apex right now.
Apex. Cool. Awesome. And then how long have you been at Golden Valley?
This is year 5.
Year five. Nice. Awesome. Okay, what are some strategies that you use to connect subject matter to real life concepts?
Um, it's an interesting question. Coming up with strategies, like, keywords for strategies is kind of a tough one to come up with. But there are times where you can connect things that are relevant to their life with the current thing that you're teaching in class. Like, for instance, if we're teaching something about the Mexican Revolution, I can connect how the Mexican Revolution has impacted certain aspects that they might have felt in their life or their parents' life or grandparents' life. Try to just
Cool.
bring the material back to personal experiences that they or family members might have had.
Cool. Definitely. What are some routines in the classroom you use uh, to promote learning for everyone? Like maybe what are some procedures or routines you typically have in the class?
So this one I stole from my buddy in the military, but it's SOPs, standard operating procedures. It
Okay.
should be very predictable. Like, your students should know what the expectation is in your classroom the second they step through the door. Like, each one of my classes knows what my routine is going to be from beginning to end of the day. And I think establishing that SOP, standard operating procedure, goes a long way for creating an environment that you can spend less time managing and more time teaching.
Awesome. How do you structure curriculum to ensure students understand key concepts? So, it's a better way to word that. Maybe how do you what are some ways you incorporate key concepts into the curriculum?
So I think the word that you're looking for here is scaffolding. Like, how do you make sure that key concepts are getting to the students through the teaching, like the learning targets or the standards that you're teaching for that unit? And it's by placing the appropriate scaffolding and using summative and formative assessments to gauge student understanding. So you're using their work to figure out if they have a comprehension of the subject, and if they don't, you use scaffolding or strategies to go back to improve those missing connections.
Cool. In what ways do you change your instruction for EL students or students with special needs?
So because a lot of what I do online using Canvas and other like various online resources. There's a lot at my disposal for that. Things like Newsella or Achieve 3000 will tailor students' literacy levels to the material that they're asked to digest. And so, again, the word goes back to scaffolding, but using the appropriate aids to help students at their learning level instead of trying to use uh, one approach for all students.
When do you decide to adjust your instructional goals based on student performance?
Feedback to ensure on. Yeah, I feel like we're going to have a lot of repeat words here, but
That's
really it comes down to formative and summative assessments. So formative and summative are, you have actual tests like multiple choice, fill in the blank, vocab banks, things like that that you can use to gauge kind of an overall understanding of a unit. And then you also have testing, summative testing, that is more gauging in the moment, right? Like, you ask questions out to the class to see if they're getting, grappling with the material. And so, in combination of using formative and summative assessments, you can decide whether or not you need to spend more time on a subject area, start doing some refreshing activities in that subject, or if the class seems like they're ready to move forward.
totally. Question 6 and 7, I'm just going to tie together. What do you consider to be the most effective piece of data to interpret student success, and how often do you review that data?
So as far as the reviewing the data question, we do that every Monday. That's what our PLTs are for. Our PLT in the World History Department is very structured, where we are expected to bring data to every meeting. And what we've decided as a department is the best data to gauge overall student understanding is by using CER responses, which are short answer responses: claim, evidence, evidence, reasoning, where students have to create a claim about the topic, support that claim with evidence, and then provide reasoning about their assertion. So it really gives us a good idea of not only if they've kind of gotten a handle on the subject, but to what degree, because they have to put it out into their own words.
Cool. What is an example of a professional goal you've set for yourself in regards to your teaching practices?
So I guess I have two for this. One is I'm trying to incorporate more projects into my units. When Canvas was introduced because of COVID, that's right when I started, everything was kind of laid out for me and I didn't really have to think outside of the box. But now that I am in my fifth year, in the last few years, I felt like I wanted to break out of that, not necessarily not necessarily reliance on Canvas, but just do something out of the normal, not always
Okay.
go, primary source, that sort of thing on Canvas. But what was the second part of that question?
It was, what is an example of professional goals you've set to improve your teaching practices? So I guess installing more projects for the students.
Okay, yeah. And then the other one, which would translate across all subject areas, is to be more strict, which you will
Okay.
probably hear from all young teachers. I think we're all trying to walk the line of being relatable and being like somebody that the students can see as like a friend, of sorts.
Mhm.
Uh, but each year I go into the year thinking to myself, I need to approach it more strict.
Gotcha.
Approach, a little bit less wiggle room, especially in the beginning. So definitely,
Okay.
definitely take that part.
Cool. What is a professional growth opportunity you've seeked out for development or really anything regarding professional
um,
growth?
so I don't know about seeked out, but we just did the Achieve 3000 professional development training that we are putting into practice this week, actually, in both of my classes, my world history and my CTEC class. And so we did some buyout time and some trainings with Achieve 3000, which is all ties back into literacy goals for this campus.
Cool. Achieve 3000. Awesome. How do you ensure all individuals feel respected and safe within your classroom?
So for me, I set some very clear expectations at the beginning of the year when we do introductions and all that stuff, and I talk about how my class is going to run. We spend a fair amount of time talking about two kind of key concepts that I use to guide my class, which is common sense and mutual respect. And the
Yeah,
mutual respect, we do a quick little write about what mutual respect means, and then I point out that my expectation is that respect is not only between myself and the students, but between each other as well. And so I put a pretty heavy emphasis on preparing students for the expectation that respect is required in this classroom amongst everybody, not just between myself and them.
definitely. What are ways you can demonstrate honesty and integrity just for students?
Honesty and integrity. I think just being transparent, you know what I mean? Just
Yeah,
being open to talking about how you're grading and why you're grading and not having any kind of guessing games going on with students on that front. I think it just comes back to transparency.
yeah. I felt that one relates most to like grading. It's kind of like
Yeah.
being.
Transparency and kind of follow through too is like if you are going to say you're going to take away points for late submissions or something, like to follow through with it, you know what I
Right.
mean?
When was the last time you had exhibit patience for a student? with the bigger goal of them achieving, success
I mean,
on a
we can,
daily.
I don't know if you have time for me to answer this question. It's every single day,
Yeah.
multiple students per period. Yeah, you are going to have to demonstrate patience a lot of the time. It's like in our class, in any given class, you are going to have a small group of high achievers, the majority group of people that are there who will, take care of business. And then you'll have the small group of underachievers, the people that put very little importance on school. And they require a certain amount of patience and understanding if you want to get them to buy in. And that's my biggest thing is like, even if you have a student that is taking F's in every course, if you can get them to buy into your class, the way that you're doing things, then you can get some effort out of them. So how you do that, I think the biggest part is, the key word is SEL, social emotional learning. You have to provide them with an environment that they want to do well in. And a big part of that is creating the relationship between you and them.
Awesome. Do you teach them ways to resolve conflict within a learning community?
Hold on. What's up? Yeah, I'm recorded right now. All right, say that one more time.
Um, I said, is there ways to teach students, or do you have ways of teaching students how to resolve conflicts within themselves to help keep a learning community? Number
Yeah.
13.
What question are we on? Just so I can get ready.
13.
13. Okay. Um, how to resolve conflict in order to keep safe learning community. Yeah, again, that is something that we deal with a lot on this campus. Fighting is not something that's rare around here,
Definitely.
and the I mean, it really just comes down to trying to get through to the students that there is no positive outcome to engaging in like physical violence or any type uh, of what's the word I'm looking for, conflict. And the one liner that I always come back to is if you allow somebody to like manipulate your emotions to the point where you lose control, whether that lost control means blowing up verbally or getting into a physical altercation, they've already won, right? They've already like gotten you to the point where you've lost control. And so you just try to give them a little bit of perspective through going back to that keyword when you're typing these up, social emotional learning, where you bring it back and you try to get them to tap into some of those mature mindsets, mature thought processes that don't react in that emotional moment.
Right. Basically, cover number 14 there. It's saying what are some ways to ensure that they won't harass each other. If you can teach them the social emotional learning, that's kind of your way of getting to them. Uh,
Yeah, the key word is back to SEL.
yeah,
And I every other day is kind of like welcome to my TED talk, and I give them some bit of advice that I think is relevant or useful. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is nobody has the right to tell somebody else how to live their life. Like if it's not the way that you want to live your life, then that's fine. You don't have to, right? But if it's not harming you, if it's not affecting you in some type of negative, tangible way, then you have no right to tell somebody else how to live their life, just like they don't have the right to tell you how to live your life. And I feel like it's really coming back to SEL, but if you're trying to get away from that, just like keyword SEL, it's just about trying to provide some perspective, trying to get them to think outside of their own shoes and understand that everybody walks their own path. Everybody has their own story. You don't get to tell them how to do theirs.
definitely. Uh, when there has been a case of bullying or harassment, what did you do to resolve it? Did you send them outside, send them to the dean's office, write them up? What's kind of the quick procedure, what you did in a moment like that?
Um, So I've never witnessed a moment of bullying, racism, or sexism in the classroom. I'm sure I will at some point, but I think that is something that typically does not happen within the the view or earshot of a teacher. But if it were to happen, I would just go through my checklist. All three of those things are zero tolerance issues, and so first thing you do is contact the dean's office. You in that or you stop that moment from breeding into something worse, right? So you get the student removed from class. Then you contact their counselor and explain the situation in class, and then you and the counselor can decide if parents should be informed and like where to go from there. But really, when you get to those three things, bullying, racism, or sexism, those are, like I said, zero tolerance types of issues. And so you just going to have to go through the appropriate channels through the school to make sure that those are resolved quickly.
Awesome. Last couple questions here. Do you contact families when a student's struggling with their learning, maybe struggling with grades? Do you reach out to families?
Did we stick 16?
Yeah, 16 you answered earlier. You kind
Okay.
of, I felt like that was kind of one of those repeat, but we're on 17 here. Like, do you ever collaborate with colleagues or families to support the student learning?
um, yeah, so there's really only two instances when you are going to contact families, right? And it's either, and they're both on either end of the spectrum. You're either contacting home because that student is doing something unacceptable in class that you haven't been able to solve on your own, and you need the help from the parents to make sure that that behavior changes. Or the flip side, if you notice something in a student that is a positive change, a positive improvement, then you can always call home just to let the parents know that you've seen a positive improvement. And that ripple effect typically goes a long way when students
Cool.
are not only getting the benefit in school, but also getting the pat on the back at home for a positive behavioral change. That can go a long way to, again,
Awesome.
linking it back to the SEL stuff, that social emotional learning.
Yeah, that's cool. I think a lot of times you connect reaching out to families in a negative way. That's good. You can implement it on a positive direction. What inspired you to become an educator? What gave you the calling to empower students through learning?
Um, you know, as far as inspiration goes, if I had to pinpoint something, I did not have a very productive first couple of years of high school. I was very much in the mindset of this is something that I have to do. And if you're going to make me, I'm going to be miserable the whole way through it. And all of that changed for me when I got involved in sports and I had team mentality, and I had to perform well in school to make sure that I could stay on the team, and had solid role models and coaches and teachers and counselors actually across the board that helped me kind of find my path. So I think that's a big part of it, is knowing that I was coming from a background of someone who wanted nothing to do with school. And then through the interaction of some key people in my life, that outlook changed significantly because I found something about school that I could really enjoy.
Awesome. Number 19, I'm gonna word this. How do you identify areas of growth as a professional educator? How can you find ways that you can improve within the classroom for students?
So, how you identify them, I feel like the what you get from your students is the most important data for identifying your
Kind of like
strengths or area of
grades
special growth.
or their like understanding of concepts? What would be like an indicator that you're doing your job for them, I guess?
Yeah, so the two big ones are their academic performance, which, yeah, to your point, grades and the data that we collect give you a clue into what their academic performance is. And then you can kind of do some self reflection and say, well, what worked well this last unit? What isn't working so well this unit? And try to change your approach that way. And then the other side of that is going back to SEL, having an environment that students look forward to being in is really the biggest hurdle. Because if you can get them to the point where they aren't dreading your class, where they're at the point where even if they're not looking forward to it, it's not a negative part of their day, you have overcome the biggest hurdle. You know what I mean? And so that again is done just through identifying, or just gauging their engagement and how their attitude is about the class. And if you see something work really well in one class, will it work well in others? That's part of the reason why when you subbed in here, I have like the sports predictions on the board and things like that. Like give them a little bit of competitiveness with other classes, but also it's just about getting buy-in. It's just
Yeah.
about trying to figure out how you can get them to buy into the way that you want to do things. And once you have their buy-in, you can get even the most stubborn students to get on it.
Cool. Last question here. Can you share a challenging experience you faced with a student as an educator, and how did you overcome it? Here I'm kind of thinking, what's a time you faced with a student who maybe wasn't performing well, but you as an educator helped pick them up, and then they really transformed into like a good student, ended up being successful in the class.
Um, yeah, I feel like I'm just kind of like saying the same thing over and over again. But in every class, you are going to have a list of students that fit that description. Someone who has presented a challenge one way or another. Maybe they're challenging because they're so shy, they're incapable of interacting with you or their peers. Or it could be a challenge where it's the opposite in the spectrum. They're so extroverted, they just can't shut it off. There's no moment where they can stop and like pay attention and do what we need to do as a class. Or in worst case scenario, they just come in with a really poor attitude and either want to make it known that they are here against their will or
Right. Yeah.
whatever. And really, they all kind of have the same response, which for me is how do you get them to buy in? And again, and it seems so redundant at this point through question 20. I don't know how many times I brought up SEL, but it really is the crux to getting anything done in the classroom. If you can get them to look at your classroom as a place that they can get some degree of enjoyment out of, then you can get the shyest kid or the most extroverted kid or the problem kid to kind of fall in line and buy in. And that's the biggest thing. That's, I think, what most teachers struggle with. Because, you can call it classroom management or SEL, but that's the biggest hurdle to get over is how do you manage 30 bodies? How do you get 30 people to do what you're asking them to do for an hour straight without problems, right?
Exactly.
And it all comes back to buy-in. It all comes back to if they want to do well, they will. But if they don't want to do well, then you're on an uphill battle. You can't win it more than them.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Johnston. I appreciate you coming in here and doing the interview for me.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.